Okay, thank you, Li Ming. Can everybody hear me okay and see my screen? All right, excellent. So again, thanks for having me today. Um, I was really trying to think about what to present to this group, and I had an idea a couple of weeks ago when Carol reached out to me that was related to our performance measures work that we're doing. There's obviously a lot of impact from the new transportation planning rule, ongoing work with the Oregon Highway Plan, obviously this implementation of the CFAC. So I thought about what to do and tie it into VMT, and we actually had some good presentations earlier today already that sort of talked about some of these elements. And I was thinking, we use speed or we use volume to capacity ratio, some of these long-standing performance measures to evaluate our system, but let's see if I can come up with a hypothetical. Maybe it's not totally hypothetical. We can be optimistic that it could happen, and then use the idea of VMT, whether it's VMT per capita, as a performance measure for a specific type of project that I want to share. And like I said, this is really a bit of a hypothetical presentation, or I guess sort of presentation, but I do want to use it as a way of generating conversation with so many of the people on the group, and it's great to have such a large group today, so we can talk about some of the things that we might have to do if we want to use VMT as a performance measure. Okay. All right. So I'll talk a little bit about the problem statement and cover some givens. Yes.
Would you mind put in the presentation mode so we have screen? Yeah, great, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So we'll talk a little. I'll give you the problem statement and the givens I've sort of come up with, and talk then sort of the supporting policy framework that gets us to the selection of VMT as the performance measure, and then spend a little bit of time on some scenario development and the analytical process, and then I'd like to leave up plenty of time for a group discussion. So with that discussion, a lot of it hopefully will either be, this is a great idea, I think it's workable, or this is not going to go at all, in which case I think we might learn a lot about the applicability of VMT per capita as a performance measure. Also interesting to tie it to Metro's regional performance or mobility policy. All right. So as many know, especially if you're in the Portland area, we're going to get a new baseball team. I'm a big sports fan. I don't want to make this just sort of about sports, but it really could be anything else. And there's been some talk about having a stadium in a couple of different locations, and it seems that the Zidell Yards over on the South Waterfront is the top place for doing this. And now we're talking about, well, how do we get all these people and all the traffic to and from the stadium, for whether we're talking about baseball or these other things? And there's lots of ways of doing it, which is typical for any sort of large stadium. We're building new infrastructure, we're managing operations and capacity from what we currently have, we're bringing in transportation options, and there's a whole list of other ones. Part of the transportation planning rule is the selection of key performance measures, or even standards to a certain sense, and we know that both Metro has that as one of their mobility policies, and we're saying that on the assumption here that the city of Portland, out of all the different things they can use to measure the transportation system related to this new stadium, they're going to select the key performance measure of VMT per capita. It's not really per capita in some ways, we can talk about it per seat, but when I'm saying VMT per capita, know that we're sort of measuring it based on the people that are coming and going to the stadium. Okay. So some givens here just a little bit of the context where everybody is. So you see, here's our Portland region. This small orange dot is roughly where the stadium would go, or it's currently being proposed. The Oregonian had this really great series, at least online, of all these different stadiums sort of shoehorned into this tiny little site that you see is sort of bounded on the east side by the Willamette River, on the north by where the Orange Line and the Tilikum Crossing cross the river. West side is Interstate Interstate 5, and then on the south side is the Ross Island Bridge, US 26. And then a lot of the South Waterfront OHSU development is further south. I don't know exactly how we're going to get a stadium in here, but this has sort of been the proposal. Thankfully, Portland is one of the smaller markets for this, so maybe we'll be able to sort of get it in. But we're going to go with this for the time being. All right. Took a look. Most stadiums for the city size of Portland between 5 and 40,000. Baseball has 160 games a year, so 81 home games. This is not preseason or postseason. And with a stadium this size, we're definitely going to be able to get Taylor Swift and some of these other concerts that seem to sort of miss Portland because we don't have a large enough venue. So this is something that's going to be used not just 81 plus times a year rather, but maybe 120, 150 times depending on what we're doing. We know as travel modelers, a stadium is certainly constitutes as a special generator. And it's creating new demand, right? Both locally in the Portland area, regionally within the Portland metro area or Vancouver, and even possible statewide travel demand because there's only so many baseball teams around, and people that live in Medford that now have to travel to San Francisco to see the closest game or be able to come up to Portland. Because of the tight location, there's not going to be a lot of opportunity for major infrastructure development in terms of like widening highways or adding new interchanges. It's a pretty tight location. If you think about some of the other spots, whether it was in the Lloyd Center or at the Red Tail Golf Center, these are a major questions in terms of being able to get people to and from. And maybe my largest assumption here is that we're going to have some alignment. We have alignment on all the different jurisdictions, whether this is Portland, Multnomah County, Oregon, Metro, that we're selecting VMT per capita or VMT per seat as our performance measure. That's going to be the number one thing we look at when we look at a number of scenarios for measuring travel to and from the stadium. Okay. Briefly, a little bit of policy framework, where this VMT per capita is coming from. We are all familiar to a certain extent with the local, regional, and statewide plans, whether it's the Climate Action Plan or the Climate Smart Strategy, the mobility policy for Metro, and obviously the work that I'm doing with so many others at ODOT from the statewide transportation strategy all the way down to the TPR and the climate friendly and equitable community. So VMT per capita is a major part of these. These plans also set carbon reduction goals for various other aspects of stadium construction, talking about all electric or building energy use, reporting on these type of things. But they also really focus on these policies, rather not specifically for a stadium, but generally for any of the work we're doing in our region, also have that focus on transportation and land use. So a little bit more how we get to VMT as a performance measure. We have the Oregon Administrative Rules, Section 215 and also 905 that cover performance measures and the adoption of local performance standards. We're not going to be using a standard here because we're not saying that the VMT per capita has to be 50% below the average elsewhere. In the Portland area, we don't have a target to meet. We're just saying that we're looking to come up with a selection of a scenario, given all of the other trade-offs we have, cost and congestion, where we're looking to minimize vehicle miles traveled in terms of getting to and from the stadium. And like I said, that could be on a sort of per seat basis. But ultimately, where we're going to try and come up here with scenarios that create different amounts of VMT and then going through the modeling exercise, which I haven't done. So I don't want to get anybody excited that I've gone through all this special modeling work, but I do want to talk about what can we do, what could we do if this were to come to pass. But ultimately here, we're saying we're not worried about congestion on I-5. We're not worried about equity. I mean, these are all of these trade-offs, but we're really focusing on how to minimize vehicle miles traveled. Okay, and I'm saying as a connection to some of the other performance measures that might relate to aspects of stadium construction, we're talking about households that can be located within transit that are accessible to the stadium or within the stadium. There's aspects of obviously we're going to be paying for parking. There's some percentage of construction budget that can be spent on supporting or building infrastructure for low or no carbon modes of transportation. The stadium area around it to develop it with a pedestrian and bicycle level traffic stress that's very conducive to that kind of work. Obviously, getting people to and from the stadium safely is also sort of very important. So there's some connection here between the VMT per capita measure and the performance measures that we're looking to do at the regional level per the target rule. As I mentioned before, we have some infrastructure challenges here, mostly related to the constrained site and the limited type of freeway or arterial connections. Again, we have some of them, but this is not, some greenfield development out on the edge or some of the stadiums you see elsewhere in the United States. The area is currently congested. Most ball games are happening in the evenings or on the weekends. This section of I-5 and down in South Waterfront, it's fairly dense already. There's a lot going on, and now we're adding all this new traffic. There's not much parking down there. What I mean down there is South Waterfront. We also have some question about how much room we want to build or how much room there is to build more for that. These neighborhoods, especially the South Portland one, has seen over the last 100 years lots of changes as far as transportation, and that certainly affected neighborhood livability, sort of cut up the neighborhood in a lot of different ways. Obviously, through the development process, maintaining the emergency first responder access is key requirement, and clearly freight movement, whether we're talking about bringing concessions to the stadium or getting Taylor's concert set up is a key consideration. On the flip side, we have a lot of opportunities and a lot of our mobility assets, which is part of the reason this site was selected. So the Tillicum Crossing, this non-motorized bridge over the Willamette that carries all those different modes. We have a higher capacity transit system, whether it's bus or MAX. We have the tram. Obviously, this is an area that has lots of great pedestrian and bicycle routes. There's micromobility options. We have opportunities for some sort of park and ride, whether to use the downtown parking garages or even sites elsewhere, possibly on the east side. And even though we don't have necessarily direct freeway connections, we have a lot of connections close by, again, mostly in downtown. There's opportunities for the transportation network company. Maybe we could set up a water taxi. There's lots of different things we can do. And again, part of the challenge that would come to evaluate this is how do we incorporate all of these things into the travel model, or even can we? So getting to the scenario development. And these are some of the questions I want people to think about so we can discuss. So some of the elements are, can we model? So we know that our travel model can definitely cover the local and regional access. But when we're looking at longer distance travel, people coming from the southern part of the Willamette Valley or elsewhere in Oregon, are we going to be able to model this? Is this something that the statewide integrated model can be a part of the project to do this? Transit, again, something that's part of our travel model already. We can do that. We need to sort of look at different ways of incorporating those capacity and operations. We have pricing policy, whether it's parking, is there a cordon pricing measure we can do to get into the zone as a way of really reducing the desire for vehicles to get there. Also, questions on, in terms of some of the development aspects, would it be possible, along with the stadium development, to also include some measure of housing? And I'm not talking just 100 or 200 units, but maybe something like 2,500 units. I'm just putting out numbers here that can include public work for housing, not just for construction workers, but for people that would be working at the stadium or for the team or the other related businesses there. Elsewhere in South Waterfront, again, these folks can walk or bike to the stadium. That's going to reduce the amount of travel needed. There's always the potential for mixed use and freight movement, which of course, is limited, and there's also these travel option programs. Again, the question here is, what can we do in terms of developing multiple scenarios to test out to try and find one that might actually reduce VMT or provide a minimal amount of VMT relative to some of the other ones. Really thinking about some of the analytical process. Again, just putting some ideas out here. Do we have data to support some of this scenario development as a VMT performance measure? Even practical aspects of the model itself. Do we need one TAZ to represent the entire stadium? Do we need other ones to sort of to break it out? Do we look for a model scenario that effectively is our sort of our no build or our worst case scenario, where we have like 20,000 parking spots? I know it's not realistic in terms of the actual infrastructure, but could we assume that to say that basically, even though it's a very tight location, we could assume near 100% auto mode share to the stadium, just to see what that would look like in terms of VMT and work backwards from there to try and minimize. I know, and I apologize to Tara here, who's been spending so much time, like we all have, really focusing on this household-based VMT, but one of the benefits of VMT, and for folks that are familiar with that Fair and Peers graphic that shows 9 different ways of measuring VMT, this one would be one where we're not really looking for household-based per the definition in Division 12, but actually measuring the actual on-road vehicle miles traveled and work to try and minimize that. So we have an option using the performance measure to actually not use the household-based definition if we're looking for a specific project. Okay, just a couple more things here to sort of work through. Again, putting out some ideas. We look at, I know we've done trip caps when we've done smaller area plans like out by the airport. Could we do something also for VMT in terms of as development proceeds, making sure that it's not over a certain amount? How do we measure the travel through all modes to make sure we're incorporating this? Do we have to do some off-model work due to some of the limitations of our trip-based model? Or maybe do we develop an activity-based model specifically for this type of evaluation? Can we capture park and rides for off-site parking facilities? Do we capture people from the airport? What time periods for analysis? Again, a lot of games are in the evenings, but we also have Saturday games, Sunday games. Do we look at multiple ones and try to minimize it across all those aspects? Do we look for summer months, which is sort of the main part for baseball? Or is it a combination of all these things? Again, a lot of questions here on how to do this particular type of project. And then getting to the methodology, again, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the overall methodology that we're getting close to wrapping up. But for this particular project, this hypothetical, obviously we're going to use the regional travel model. I would like to see an opportunity for SWIM to try and capture some of the statewide or external. Again, there's also cases where measuring VMT on non-game days when people are actually working at the stadium. How do we measure that? How does that get incorporated in? And in some ways, I really would like to hear from our group to find out, if we were to do this, do our existing modeling tools, whether it's the ones that are currently in place or ones we could implement if we needed to do this, are they sufficient to a certain extent, given some of the other ways of doing the analysis, to look at and get to this result for this hypothetical situation? And if it does not, or we don't think that's the case, do we really feel that that using VMT per capita as a performance measure, as applied to a specific project, whether it's a development project like a new stadium or even a particular transportation project like the Interstate Bridge, does that render it somewhat infeasible, at least within the context of Oregon's transportation planning process? And I think that's the last one. So I'd like to just turn it open now for some discussion.